Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think we should be just about ready to get going. So thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on today's webinar on how we're supporting our people for long-term success. We invited our guests from National Australia Bank to join us to talk to us about their experience over the last few months dealing with the unprecedented situation that we've all found ourselves in. This is actually the fourth in a series of webinars that are designed to help support you and your company, your employees, throughout these unprecedented times. These are featuring members of the Glint People Science team, as well as your peers from across the region. We'd also love to hear feedback from you if there are any other topics that you would like us to cover in this series, so please do feel free to reach out. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. All of the attendee lines are muted, just to improve the sound quality for our presenters and for all the attendees. But we do encourage you to ask questions, so please do type your questions into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. At any time during the presentation, as soon as you think of something that you would like to ask, feel free to put your question in there. We will be recording the webinar. The recording will be made available on BrightTalk for you to watch again and for you to share with your peers and your colleagues. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speakers. First of all, Thomas Rasmussen is the Executive General Manager, Employee Experience, Digital and Analytics at National Australia Bank. Prior to joining NAB, Thomas was VP HR Data and Analytics at Shell and held various HR roles at AP Moller Maersk. He received his master's and PhD in Industrial and Organizational Psychology from the University of Aarhus in Denmark. Thomas believes that data and evidence should supplement business understanding, experience, and intuition in decision-making on people issues, and that this will enable business to deliver more value to customers, shareholders, and employees. Joining Thomas today is Ed Hurst, who is a Principal People Science Consultant at Glint, with over 20 years' experience in the field of organizational consulting. Before joining Glint, Ed was at IBM Connexa, SHL, and Saville Consulting, taking a key role in thought leadership, consulting, and operations. An industrial organizational psychologist, Ed has consulted to some of the world's largest and most complex organizations. He combines deep expertise in the field with wide-ranging experience of advising senior leaders in a way that is both strategic and highly practical. So I will hand it over to you now, Ed and Thomas. Take it away.
Thank you very much indeed, Nikki. And I'd just like to begin by a huge thank you both to Thomas for participating in this. I know that you're deeply involved in all of this, and obviously NAB is one of Australia's sort of most prominent and key organizations. So I know all of us are, very, very appreciative of your time. I'd really like to kick off by asking you, obviously, in your role with an organisation that is just so integrated across Australia in particular, since the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak, what are some of the most important things that you've learned and heard from your people's feedback?
Thank you, Ed, and thanks, Nikki and Ed, for having me on this webcast. So I think collectively we've learned a lot, and I think what we've seen is really an acceleration of things that would otherwise have taken us a decade to get feedback on. So just a few data points. Our technology colleagues managed to enable more than 80% of our 34,000 colleagues to work from home within a couple of weeks, including all the security access and setup, right? And that is a huge shift. And I think what we've learned is that, yes, you can actually work from home. We've also learned that people actually tend to work more. So while sort of, a particular generation of leaders are not yet fully comfortable with people working from home yet, and I suspect some of them fear that a large part of the workforce would be goofing off and watching Netflix. What we see is it's not that we need to be concerned about. It's more a health and well-being thing, because we can actually see that by and large people actually work more, almost 20% more. And while we greatly appreciate that, it also presents some challenges in terms of work-life balance. We've also learned that it is possible to do excellent onboarding of new colleagues without ever meeting them face to face. And we've also learned that using digital technology really helps us focus our meetings. You know, they begin on time, they end on time, and they're a bit focused. But there's also a need to make sure we have some fun and connect on the human side as well. So that's really, those are really some of the things we're seeing. We're also seeing that the role of leadership just grows. We're in a situation where a lot of people have never worked in a virtual team before, so it's new for them. But a lot of leaders have also never had a virtual team before, so it's also new for them. So really sort of supporting all the way around. And then I guess what we've learned is that our employees really appreciate frequent open communication that has primarily been led by our Chief People Officer, Susan Ferrier. So really sort of daily emails and updates and weekly seminars going all the way around to support very different aspects of what's facing us right now. So those are some of the key things that we've learned. Ed.
Thank you. And we've certainly found at Glint in all of our work that as you say, the manager population, the leader population is absolutely crucial in terms of everyone else's experience. Are there some things that you've either had great success with that population, or things that in hindsight you kind of wish you'd done a bit more of?
So I think our colleagues have been very understanding. We've probably gotten a little bit of help and additional patience, because we have been dealing with something that none of us have ever tried before. I think what we've learned is that good leadership really pays off in times of a crisis, right? So we see our great leaders really stepping up. And then we see a lot of leaders, requiring a little bit of a support and a little bit of a refresher, just to make sure that we sort of adjust well to the new environments. And it's also fair to say, our leaders are also our colleagues, and a lot of us have been enjoying homeschooling as well. So it's only today that my 9-year-old started back in school, for instance. So I think we've all been juggling these different aspects. But I think sort of it's no surprise, but what's really stood out for us is the importance of leadership through a situation like this when things are changing. Frequent check-ins, getting feedback, and then also supplementing the frequent communication with an opportunity for people to tell us how they feel and what they think. And that's where Glint has been really a cornerstone in our efforts. So you'll know this, Ed, right? So we've done 4 surveys using Glint in a 5-week period, and we're doing a 5th one in a couple of weeks. So really that speed where you can agree on a Monday that it's absolutely core to provide our leaders with this input. Tuesday you send out the survey, which is then done Thursday, and then on Friday provide your 3,000-4,000 people leaders with their whole bespoke recording with drivers and comments and all that stuff. So that has been hugely helpful as well, enabling that two-way communication. So our leaders can also learn from the feedback they're getting from our colleagues.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I mean, we've certainly found that it's been a time when, although some organisations' instincts have been to say it's too crazy, everything's altering, let's come back and have a conversation, run a survey when things are a little bit more back to normal. I think the organisations which have been most effective in all of this are those like NAB, who've said exactly the opposite of that there has never been a more important time to have a conversation, to understand what people are feeling and experiencing, so that our actions can be really agile, really targeted to optimize everyone's experience as much as possible, for both for their own well-being and for customers as well.
Yeah, I think so, and definitely, and that's the position we've taken. That if you don't do it now, then when? Now is absolutely the time you need to beef up two-way communication, and a survey is an excellent tool to help you do that. And I guess what I think I may be quoting you here, Ed, right? There is no thing as survey fatigue. If you design a short, sharp, to the point survey with questions that people actually care about, they will welcome it and they will provide you feedback. That's what we're seeing. I think what would not work is this, old world 80-100 question survey, and it's going to take me 3-4 weeks before I actually get the results, and by the time I get it, I will have forgotten about it. That won't work. But using a platform like Glint and Glint's philosophy, first of all, it really needs to be useful. And of course, valid at the same time, and then the speed, so that you really get the feedback more or less immediately after the survey closes, so that our leaders can act on the results, because that's the whole point. Have a conversation, but then act on it, so we can make things better.
Yeah. If it drives effective action, what's to be fatigued by it if it feels like a pointless exercise that the thing gets annoying, isn't it? So all our energy's in the action ultimately, isn't it? So yeah.
Yep.
Thomas, one thing that you talked about, which I think is really interesting and has also been a focus of ours, is that a lot of people have found benefits in this challenging time. Some people are spending more time with their family, they're enjoying the flexibility, they're finding the productivity is actually increasing, their freedom's increased. Whereas other people, some people have been struggling with the uncertainty, withdrawing lines between work and other parts of their life because they're working at home, and so the boundary is kind of harder to define. Some people are experiencing isolation. So I'm interested, have you been finding anything about what it is that seems to make the difference between people having a positive experience of all of this, of remote working, of working in an unfortunate time, and those who don't? Is it a personality trait? Is it how people are managed? Is it random? Is it about the job you're in? Have you found any patterns in this at all?
Definitely. So I think a lot of things impact this. So it's both personality and context, and where are you in your life, and all of this stuff. But if I was to draw out a couple of keys, I'd say by and large, most people find the recent situation incredibly appealing, and they find an increase in well-being, and they find increase in their productivity and their ability to focus. So you get that from across the board. Almost from 80% of our people clearly see the advantages. So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but there's much more on the positive list than on the watch out list. I think where we've seen differences is more how are people set up, right? Because it's one thing if you live in a big house and you have an extra room that's your own office and your internet connection is outstanding, and by the way, you don't have small kids, right? Then you'll be this is the best thing that ever happened. Finally I get away from that big shared office where I can't concentrate or whatever. Whereas if you're in a shared flat with 3 other people and the Wi-Fi is not very good, and they're constructing a huge building right next to where you live and it's super noisy all day, that's a very different situation. And we actually also used Glint to get some feedback on that, because we wanted to get some data points on where is it people are, right? And that's also some of the things we're considering. I think people actually, instead of either or, the colleagues of NAB actually prefer some sort of a hybrid, where you take advantage of the opportunities of working 2-3 days per week, and then perhaps spend 2 or 3 days per week in a branch or in a business banking center or in one of our office locations. So much more flexible and much more fluid rather than either or seems to be the sweet spot. And on the good things that people quote to us, I mean, the obvious thing in a city like Melbourne is just, you don't have that 1-hour commute in the morning and in the afternoon. That's, time you get back for free. And then on the, on stuff that people want more, that's more sort of the belonging and the fellowship and so on, right? And people have gotten quite creative in terms of, virtual Easter egg hunts and virtual wines and whatnot. So really sort of conscious that they're spiffing up that effort as well. People are different, however, right? And there is a small minority of people that say, "Oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened. I can't wait until I get back to the office." Which, by the way, we're never going back to where we were. And others that say, I actually just want to work from home all the time forever, and that might not work for everyone, because it's also it's a combination of business needs and individual preferences, and then also practicalities, right? And at the end of the day, NAP is a bank, and we are here to serve our customers. While me as an individual and our 4,000 colleagues, we have preferences. It has to be centered around, what's right for our customers. So the right question is really, what do our customers want? And it turns out, a lot of them would actually rather have a Zoom call at 8 in the evening, and then go to the branch, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where a lot of them are working, right? Whereas others feel differently. So we need to really sort of adapt our setup to what works well for our customers and our colleagues. That's where the real sweet spot is.
Yeah. So instead of it being about a particular level of flexibility or a particular kind of arrangement, it's more about being able to understand what's going to be useful for particular individuals, and being flexible about it, and perhaps offering more choice in that. Yeah. As a colleague of mine said, on the positive side, I'm seeing a lot more of my kids. On the negative side, I'm seeing a lot more of my kids. So there's always ways of interpreting that, aren't there? Okay. Can I just check, Thomas, that you're still there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, the internet just got back again.
Yeah, cutting in and out just a bit, isn't it? So let's see if we can just make it a little bit clearer on our end, perhaps, as well. So one thing, Thomas, that I'm conscious of is that you've been doing some particularly exciting analysis that's a combination of Glint data from surveys with Microsoft Workplace Analytics, and that you've been actually achieving a particular level of insight that you couldn't have got from one of those sources independently, but from that combination of both. And I'd love to get into this a bit more, and perhaps ask you to share what you're learning from that kind of analysis. But I wonder if it might be helpful if we just started with a simple explanation or introduction for those on the call, perhaps who haven't been exposed to the Workplace Analytics tool, just to kind of what that tool is, and how it works, and then perhaps we can get into the implications of that as well. Sure.
Let me start by that. So Workplace Analytics is a Microsoft platform, and for these companies that are on the Office 365 platform, it basically allows you to safely, and while respecting data privacy and ethics, because that really is the starting point, extract insights on how people use that time. Because most of us will send a lot of emails, receive a lot of emails. We'll also have a lot of things in our Outlook calendar. We may be using Teams, Zoom, other applications, and so on. And the Workplace Analytics platform basically enables you at aggregate and at a team level to get that information and turn that into useful nuggets. And so while a survey will often get to the perceptions and emotions and preferences that people have, this tracks actual behavior. So it's very important to underscore it's not a measure of productivity, unless you believe the amount of emails you have in Outlook is a measure of productivity, or the amount of emails you send. But it is an indication of how much time do you actually spend with your direct reports, and how many sort of full team gatherings do you have? How much time do your direct reports spend in evening meetings or in early morning meetings? How much do they work over the weekend, and so on, which are really important inputs to leading a virtual team. It can also map network size and connectivity, and how much time is the HR division spending with the business, and should it be more, should it be less, and so on. So a valuable source of data. Does that make sense, Ed?
Absolutely, it does. Yes. So, and I know from our earlier conversations that you have felt that you've just from that combination of like almost the the feedback information from Glint and the behavioral information from the workplace analytics source, that you're getting insights that you couldn't have got from either alone. So I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about that.
Definitely. So it's really, analytics is about combining different data sources, and the more data sources you have, typically, the better the insights you can get, right? So if you combine the different data, you see how are the engagement of those areas seem to have a higher workload, right? Or how are the leadership scores, or so perceptions of leadership in those areas where the team leader actually spends time with their colleagues on the team versus those areas where the team leader is too busy to actually spend time and do one-to-one conversations and so on. It's really sort of by providing that information, and I think in particular in a virtual environment, because as a leader you can't see what people are doing, so it gives you that additional input and allows you to nudge behavior in the right direction, and also watch out for burnout. So that's one of the things we have been particularly focused on in National Australia Bank. So just really identifying those teams that appear to be overworked, and just making sure that workload is managed well, because we're seeing quite an uneven distribution of workload as you deal with the crisis, as you normally do. So really making sure leaders can balance that and get the right amount of resources to where the work is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And I know that you said that obviously the volume of emails that people send is not a measure of productivity, but I also know that you said earlier on that one of the things that you're seeing at the moment is that, contrary to what people have assumed, that if you give people flexibility to work in a variety of ways, they would just spend their day on Netflix, that you're actually seeing an improvement in productivity and an impact on the customer. So I'm interested in understanding sort of how you've arrived at that conclusion. You know, how did you learn that, and what some of the implications of that might be?
Sure. And again, we don't track this at an individual level. So first of all, we work very closely with our general manager of data privacy and ethics, because we need people analytics needs to be there for good. But at a team level and aggregate level, this is helpful. So one of the things we looked at is basically just how many hours do people work in Outlook and Zoom and Team and associated products, and you can basically just get a baseline from the 8 weeks before, so in January and February, and then you can compare to what happened after COVID. And what we can see is, on average, almost a 20% increase in workload, and that's also we get validated by our survey. People say, I actually work more now. I'm also more productive. But I work more now. I don't have the commuting, and I can actually I can start earlier and end earlier, but still spend more time with my family as well. So we are tracking that as well, and that is, I think, a huge win for productivity. It's a huge loss for those that don't believe in flexibility and working from home, but I think it's a huge win for all the rest of us. And this is one of the lasting effects of COVID. I think we'll never go back to 8 to 5 in the office every day for everyone, because it's just there are too many downsides to it. It's also expensive from a real estate perspective, right? You need big expensive buildings in the middle of big cities. And maybe companies need to be able to rethink that and trying to find some sort of a hybrid where you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to come in a moment to the question of what some of the sort of longer term implications might be. But first of all, I know that you've indicated earlier that you're continuing your work to understand the well-being implications, both in terms of people's feedback and in other ways, and that your view so far is that overwhelmingly most people are having a positive experience right now from the flexibility rather than a negative one. But I wondered if there's anything else that you could tell us about how you're actually establishing that, what some of the indicators of well-being might be, and particularly if you think those might be transient short-term issues which are occurring now, or whether those are things that you think might endure in the longer term if we keep some of the flexibility?
Yeah. So I think the best way, or one of the best ways to figure out if people are happy with a given change is quite simple. You ask them, and that's what we've done. It's also the fastest and the cheapest one. So I get from a scientific point of view, if we really wanted to gauge, how healthy and happy people are, we'd probably need to go out and get blood samples and test for stress hormones and and all that stuff. So, which I think is a bad idea for a whole host of reasons. So we've simply asked people, how do you feel? And we've also been able, using Glint's platform, to get quite deep into that using the out-of-the-box AI analytics of the verbatims that we got there. So the last survey we ran, I think we got 27,000 verbatims, and that was really focused on that, right? So I think some of that really will be enduring in terms of just rethinking how you work and separating the idea of where it makes sense of work having to happen in a particular physical location, because that is sort of it's a relatively it's a notion that we challenged with increased digitization. You need to be where your customers need you to be, and for a few roles that means in a particular location. There can also be roles that are regulated or have particular safeguards around it. So for instance, in financial services trader roles, there are particular requirements around how that's done and the controls around that. But there are a lot of roles which can really be done from anywhere. So I think that will really be enduring. And I think from an inclusion perspective, this opens up the labor market to a much broader talent base as well, and makes it more. So I definitely think we should lean into that and make sure that we, because we've taken a huge leap forward. So let's make sure we don't take a huge leap backwards and then land back where we were, which is very nice what NAB's thinking is. So let's learn really from the situation and take the best learnings and make sure we hold on to them as we move into the future post-COVID, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And just to wrap up this part of our conversation before we open up to wider thoughts and questions from participants in the call, if there were a couple of things that you would most strongly recommend to other organizations from your work that should really be concentrated on in order to ensure that this horrible experience that the world is going through becomes an opportunity for everybody, what do you think are the kind of top things that organizations can do in order to really learn from that?
So every organization is different, industries are different, countries are different, so necessarily this one size fits all, but my number one recommendation would be use data. Don't just act on your gut feel, get some data. If you want to know how your workforce is feeling, I think you should ask them. If you want to know about behavior, I think you should get some behavioral measures. So for instance, using the Microsoft Workplace Analytics that integrates with Glint. And then really communicate, right? So make sure you don't make decisions without involving the people that you're making decisions about. That's your workforce. Those are your colleagues. Because that enables you to have a better discussion and to make more informed decisions. And obviously, you have to balance what your colleagues want and what their preferences are with what your customers want, because we're here to serve our customers, right? So that would be my starting point. Make sure you get some data and you feed that into your decision making, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Thank you. So, on that note, I'm going to invite Nikki back into our conversation so that she can include some of the thoughts and questions from others on the call.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Okay, just as a reminder to everybody, if you do have a question for Thomas, you can just click on the question mark on the far right-hand side of your screen and type your question in there, and we'll get through as many as we can. So to start off, you mentioned, Thomas, that well-being was a cause for concern, which I don't think is a surprise to any of us, given what's been going on. But how have you been addressing that concern, across the company?
So widespread. So you have to really take a holistic approach to this. So really communicating directly to all our colleagues, saying you need to be careful and you need to make sure that that well-being is something that you consider, right? And we've had a lot of colleagues actually also supporting each other on this, right? And that's everything from somebody had a bachelor in nutrition who was sort of like did a short thing on this is how to eat during COVID and how to resist the temptation of the fridge and all that stuff. Another colleague is a personal trainer, spinning trainer, and she's been having like weekly sort of filming her workouts at home and giving tips and tricks. We've had input on ergonomics, work-life balance, and we've also had leaders really lean in, and we've had seminars for leaders in terms of saying training, input, resources on how do I actually support my team, and then also these surveys in terms of how do we actually do that, right? And then just constant communication in terms of what's going on, right? So number one, asking everyone to look out for themselves and be proactive. Number two, making sure our leaders support that. And then the third thing, making sure that we get feedback on this as well. So those are some things.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. I think you mentioned that you've done 4 surveys so far. You've got another one coming up soon. What's your planned cadence for surveying once you move forward into the post-pandemic, so-called new normal world? How do you see that panning out?
That's a great question, and an active conversation we're having as a company. It feels like monthly will be the right cadence for National Australia Bank, at least for the foreseeable future. And maybe it will be slightly bigger quarterly spurts. And when I say bigger, I mean 15 questions. I don't mean 80. So really having a cadence where you have stuff that looks more monthly, and then on a quarterly basis for something that's a bit bigger. That would really be the thinking as we sort of test and learn. But we'll also be completely transparent, and we have been with our colleagues. We don't have all the answers. So rather than me and my team cooking up a plan for this is what it's going to look like the next 3 years, we've said, give us feedback. Let's test and learn together. And then we'll adjust. But so far, these very frequent surveys have been appreciated. I think if we kept on doing once a week, for we'd probably get different feedback. So it's been good to start with as dealt with the crisis. I think sort of short monthly and then slightly longer quarterly cadence is what we'll be leaning into initially.
And certainly that approach is what we're hearing is very successful with a variety of organizations, but only if those organizations are simultaneously focusing on action occurring as part of that. If it's simply frequently asking questions, as Thomas said, you rapidly raise the frustration, the fatigue. But if you spend time being asked questions and answering them, and then see that it actually makes your life improve and that of the people around you, then that kind of a cadence works extremely well.
Yeah, so I agree. So and that's really where the help from Glint and you, Ed, is very aligned to our sort of philosophy on surveys, right? You do a survey to drive actions and improvements. You don't do it for the sake of doing a survey or because the board is reporting and so on, right?
Yeah.
You can do some of both, but it should really be, the question should be, is this helpful? And this is helpful for our people leaders, right? And that's what we're trying to drive, and that's what that cadence sort of reflects.
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of a related question, but also taking it very, very broad as well, if you can. But so, what's top of your mind in terms of analytics in general that you'll be using as you think ahead to post-pandemic, and what do you think that new normal is going to look like as we all start to head back to the workplace, full-time, part-time, whatever it ends up being?
So I think. So the starting point for analytics hasn't changed for me. It's the most important thing when doing analytics is focus on the business problem, focus on the right thing, and that really what is the pressing issue for business. Step number 2 is then know what other people have done, what's the list, get some data, and present it in a visual appealing way, and make sure you monetize it and drive actions. That can be the analytics cycle. So that hasn't changed. I guess in terms of what I think will happen in the future, I'm really guessing. I think this is what economists, they call it scenario planning. That's also a really fancy word for guessing. And I heard a joke yesterday that analytics people and economists, they're just here to give the meteorologists some self-esteem, right? Because they're more right than we are. So I'm totally here. I think digitization will have a huge impact, because all of a sudden we figured out that we can do a lot of things that we were only talking about. So I think we've seen 5-10 years of development in terms of flexibility and digitization in 12 weeks. So I think we'll get used to that. I think we'll also get used to faster delivery. So I can certainly speak from my own experience. Across the bank, we have managed to pull stuff off in a week or in 3 weeks that would normally take 6 to 9 months or a year, and we didn't really break anything by doing it. So really sort of that focus on, deliver 80%, test and learn, and do it quickly, and don't spend, 9 to 12 months perfecting it. That for me would be some of the learnings, but I think we probably haven't fully grasped the full implications of what this means. So I think there's a lot of stuff I'm missing, and we'll only know about that as we get to it.
And I'd absolutely echo that. I think what we're hearing is that the ability to triangulate things so that our insights are much more powerful than coming from one source alone. So Microsoft Workplace Analytics being combined with engagement information is an example of that. Obviously, Glint is part of LinkedIn, so LinkedIn Learning is a big element of that. How that links back to talent pipelines. We're increasingly talking in terms of the wider concept of people success, so that engagement, performance, and learning are no longer independent conversations, but actually being understood as one holistic process. So I think that idea that, as Thomas said, you start with a business issue and a human issue, and then ask yourself what pieces of information, what kind of insights can allow us to understand and then take highly effective action, rather than continuing in a world in which all of those things are happening in separate silos. I think that's certainly what we're seeing and being a big part of at the moment as well.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Okay, just going back to the surveys, Thomas. Obviously, you've done 4 surveys. I think quite a few of our audience out there have had experience of surveys where the employee response rates have been low. What kind of percentage response rates were you seeing, if you're willing to reveal that, and what did you do to try to drive higher rates of response?
Yeah, we saw response rates very close to 80% on these short surveys, and that is, we didn't really do anything to drive it. Of course, we told people about it. Here's a survey, and then we made sure that we worked with Glint and our business stakeholders to make it super short. So you're talking about 6 questions, and one of them I think was 12. That's the longest we've done, right? That's a long survey. And just make sure it takes like 2-5 minutes to do it, and it's intuitive. I did mine when I was walking my dog on my iPhone, right? And it was sort of like boom, 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 it's done. And then that people get the report, and that everything is intuitive and easy to understand. And then we clearly communicated the results. So basically showed, this is what we found. And you should have a conversation with the leader as part of a normal team meeting. Don't overcook it. So that was really our approach. So I guess what we found is that if you make it super easy and intuitive, you don't need to do a lot of stuff to get your response rate up. And I think, almost 80%, that's a very good response rate for a survey that's open 3 days. We'd normally, we'd have it like open for a couple of weeks, right? And then we could get to that number as well with reminders and stuff like that. And we did send a couple of email reminders just to boost the response rate. But yeah, I think the secret is really, it's not like technology. If it's easy for you to use, you will do it, and if it's cumbersome, you're going to skip it, right? So if we take the pain points away, then people will just sort of do it by themselves.
Okay. So looking at those surveys, we touched earlier a little bit on this idea of productivity. The people that believe that productivity is going to drop when their teams are working from home. From the results of your surveys, how do you see the leaders in your organization managing the productivity of their teams while they're working from home? And what kind of support were their teams really looking for from those leaders while they were working remotely?
So that's a great question. So I actually don't believe the leadership task to manage productivity. To be honest, that's sort of my probably Scandinavian heritage and starting point, right? I think you need to make sure you have the right people in the right jobs, what they need to do and your customers need match their experience. And then you provide guidance, coaching, and the role of a leader is there to help remove roadblocks and to support the team rather than sort of, hello, my name is Thomas and I'm here to drive your productivity. I don't think that works in the short term. You can do it, but it has some negative consequences to it. And I actually think that kind of leadership is going out of style with new generations entering the labor market, so to speak. So I think it fits very well into sort of that thinking that perhaps when people have sort of written about between leadership and management, and granted you always have to do a bit of both. But I really think what we've seen through the crisis is that the leaders and the teams that have done the best are really those where it's more leadership coaching, and the leader is there to say, how can I help you? And leaders sort of understand that they actually work for the people beneath them. They don't work for their boss, because that's how you really drive results. So I guess that's just we've had other analytics on this, but I guess it's just reinforced through some of the data points we're getting through the last few months.
Okay, great. I think you've kind of almost answered what was going to be our final question, but just in case you have anything else to add, somebody was asking you that you mentioned that good leadership pays off in the time of crisis. Were there any other examples of sort of good leadership behavior that you observed through the analytics and through the survey work that you've been done that has really stood out to you, during this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's almost too simple, right? But sometimes simple is good. The number one thing that measures how good a leader is, the number one thing is how many minutes per week do you spend one-to-one with each of your direct reports? So just spending the actual time. Make sure that you commit to it and you get that booked and you actually you consider it part of your job when you're a leader. So I guess that for me is the most obvious behavior. Actually make sure that you set time aside to actually do it. And we had some leaders that were surprised when we sent them the data, and they said, "But I felt like we spent a lot of time together, but actually you didn't, right?" And that's the beauty of behavioral data. So I think the best leadership behavior is spend time with your direct reports one-to-one. Don't be in every meeting, but be there, be helpful. Start with questions like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How can I be helpful? Is there anything I can do to remove roadblocks and so on? Leaders that have that type of behavior seem to be doing better, is what we're observing, which shouldn't be surprise to anyone on the call, right? So it's also about being human and being available. So I think we've all seen cats and dogs and kids and partners and all that stuff through this Zoom call in meetings where they weren't supposed to be there. So just making sure that you appreciate that your colleagues are whole beings, and that you embrace that as well.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Thomas. I think we're pretty much at the end of our conversation now, but I really just wanted to finish with a big thank you. I don't think there's anybody I know in the whole industry who's more passionate, more influential, and more involved than you are in all of this. So for you to spend the time to so generously and openly share all of these thoughts and insights is hugely appreciated. I know how much we get out of our partnership as well. So thank you very much indeed. And I hope everybody on the call found it as enjoyable and as interesting as I did.
Okay, thank you, Ed. And again, thank you very much, Thomas, for your time today. So everyone, that's pretty much all we have for today. We hope you can join us for the next webinar in this series, which will be taking place in 2 weeks' time on June 23rd, when we'll be joined by Nutan Singapuri, who's a Senior HR Director here at LinkedIn. We'll be talking about what comes next, a people-centric approach to work as normal, as we all start to move back to the workplaces we've been talking about today. So thank you again to both Thomas and Ed for your insights. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this webinar, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.